picture this. You are sitting in a quiet room somewhere. Maybe it is late at night.
Right. A very classic scenario.
Yeah, exactly. And you have got this heavy ancient text sitting right there in your lap.
You are probably reciting verses that are hundreds, maybe thousands of years old.
Right. And I mean, if we are being completely honest with ourselves, there's a certain expectation of mysticism in that exact moment, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It almost feels like a magical act.
Like you were casting a spell or something, you read the ancient words, and you kind of project your hopes out into the ether.
Yes, hoping for a very specific, tangible result.
Right. Maybe you were hoping for a promotion at work. Or, you know, for a sick relative to suddenly get better. Or maybe just for some vague, divine, protective shield over your life.
You basically expect the universe to just magically reward you for your piety.
Exactly. It is a highly transactional mindset.
It really is. You put in the spiritual currency, which is just reciting the words.
Right. Pronouncing the syllables correctly.
Yeah. And then you expect a payout in the form of blessings.
It is a very comforting loop, honestly. You do the ritual, you get the little hit of spiritual points, and you feel like, well, you feel like you have done your part for the world.
But there is a massive shadow side to that comfort.
Oh, totally. Because what does that mindset actually do?
It completely absolves the individual,
Hmm.
and by extension, it absolves the entire society of any real-world responsibility.
Yeah, because we tend to, like, our ancient texts safely categorized in the realm of the ethereal. We really do.
Right, because if a text is just, mystical poetry,
Mm-hmm.
then it does not actually demand anything from us structurally.
It does not ask us to change our economic policies.
Or our legal systems, or how we distribute wealth.
Exactly. And that is exactly where our deep dive today is going to completely pull the rug out from under that mindset.
It really shatters that whole paradigm.
It does, because when you step into the world of Quranic socio-economics, specifically looking through the rationalist, analytical lens of a scholar named Allama G. Parwez, that entire mystical transaction is just broken.
Completely broken. The source material we are looking at today is a very dense analytical lecture.
Right, covering Surah Al-Imran, specifically verses 116 through 120.
And through this analytical lens, this text is not poetry. It is definitely not a book of spells.
No, not at all. Honestly, it reads like a fiercely pragmatic, civilizational blueprint.
It addresses what we might call the ritual trap.
The ritual trap. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, Parwez's framework looks at how humanity has taken this incredibly comprehensive, rigorous system of life and just watered it down into mere religious dogma.
It is wild when you think about it.
It is. The analysis we are exploring today corrects a very naive misconception.
Which is what exactly?
The idea that you can recite a text that explicitly demands total socioeconomic justice while you simultaneously build a society based on blatant exploitation.
And you still expect a divine reward just because you read the book out loud.
Right, just because you pronounce the Arabic syllables correctly. It makes no logical sense in this framework.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because right out of the gate, I want to be incredibly clear with you listening right now. Our mission today is not to take a theological side here.
Absolutely not. That is not what we do.
Right. We aren't here to endorse a specific religion. And we definitely aren't here to condemn anyone's personal beliefs or political stances either.
We are just looking at the mechanics.
Exactly. Our goal in this deep dive is simply to put on our analytical hats and explore the mechanics of this specific ideology as presented in the source lecture.
We want to understand how this rationalist school looks at an ancient text and essentially sees social physics.
Yes. Social physics. We are treating this exactly like we would treat a newly discovered architectural blueprint. Nothing more, nothing less.
And to read this blueprint correctly, we have to start with the most foundational distinction this school of thought makes.
Right. There is a massive linguistic distinction early on in the source.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is a distinction between two core concepts. The words are mazhab and din.
Now, if you just run those two words through a standard translation app on your phone, they both basically spit out the exact same word.
Right. They usually just translate as religion.
Religion, okay. But that is not what is happening here.
No, not in traditional parlance. They mean religion, yes.
Yeah.
But in the systemic framework Parwez is outlining, they are diametrically opposed concepts.
They are practically enemies.
They really are. Mazhab translates roughly to what we modernly, in the West conceptualize as religion.
A private affair.
Exactly. It is highly private. It allows for internal divisions for different sects, for highly personalized individual beliefs and rituals.
Right. So I can have my version of the mazhab, and you can have yours.
Yes. And a mazhab can exist perfectly fine if you're living under an oppressive dictator, for example,
Or in a hyper-capitalist dystopia.
or a feudal monarchy. Because as long as you can sit in your room, perform your personal ritual, and hold a specific belief in your heart,
Your mazhab is intact.
exactly, it does not actually threaten the status quo.
It is politically and economically completely inert.
Precisely. Din, however, as defined by this rationalist school, is a unified socio-political mechanism.
It is a mechanism in an economic system, right?
Yes, it is fundamentally a state entity. It demands systemic, real-world application.
So you cannot practice a din by yourself in a dark room.
No. You need a society for a din to exist.
So if I am understanding this, din is literally an operating system for a society. It is the code that runs the economy, the courts, the foreign policy.
That is a great way to put it. And if a society tries to run on a fragmented mazhab, where everyone just has their own personalized ritualistic version of the truth,
What happens?
you get massive internal corruption. You get sectarian friction.
Because everyone is playing by different internal rules.
Right. The core argument here is that taking this specific ancient text, which outlines a din, and trying to implement it merely as a private mazhab is a form of massive self-deception.
I was trying to think of an analogy for this earlier. It is like, imagine buying a multi-million-dollar supercomputer designed to map the human genome.
Okay.
And you are just using it as a paperweight on your desk.
Oh, that is good.
Right. It is holding your papers down perfectly fine, but you are walking around telling everyone you are a master geneticist.
That is a brilliant analogy, and the tragedy, according to this framework, is that for centuries, people have been holding that supercomputer, using it as a paperweight, and wondering why their society is still plagued by poverty and injustice.
They're wondering why the machine is not giving them the results.
Exactly, because they never turned it on.
Which brings us to the real meat of this deep dive today. How do we turn the computer on?
That is the big question.
Right. If this text is actually a blueprint for a system of providence, a machine designed to generate justice and stability, how has it been misunderstood for so long?
Well, it comes down to language, the vocabulary of a civilization.
Language is everything.
Parwez argues that over centuries, the robust, systemic, almost legalistic vocabulary of the Quran has been softened.
Softened, like the edges have been sanded off.
Exactly. It has been diluted into these passive religious placeholders that fit perfectly into the mazhab mindset.
But they completely obscure the din.
Right. If you want to control a population, you change the definitions of the words they use to understand their world.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly true. Let's look at two specific terms from verse 120 in our source material to see how this works. The words are sabra and taqwa.
Yes, two very famous words.
If you, the listener, go grab a standard traditional translation off a bookshelf right now, you are going to see sabr translated as patience.
And in a religious context, patience usually implies passive endurance.
Right, just sitting there and taking it.
It means when the world is crushing you, when you are oppressed or poor or suffering massive injustice, your job is to just sit quietly and take the hits.
Do not revolt. Do not complain.
Do not build a better system. Just have sabr. Just be patient.
And the second word, taqwa, is usually translated as fear of God, or sometimes piety.
Which, perfectly feeds that ritual trap we discussed earlier.
Oh, totally. Think about it. If you are a peasant being exploited by a feudal lord, the traditional translation tells you, be patient, have sabr, and tremble in fear of God's wrath, which is taqwa, and eventually, in the afterlife, you will be rewarded.
It is an inherently passive, fatalistic posture. And who does that benefit?
It entirely benefits the oppressor.
Exactly. But the systemic definition provided by this rational analysis flips the board completely.
I love this part.
Parwez looks at the linguistic roots of these words and says, no, this has absolutely nothing to do with sitting in a corner and crying.
So what does sabr actually mean in this context?
It actually means unwavering steadfastness.
Steadfastness.
Yes, it means consistency in upholding an ideological goal against all opposition. It is not passive endurance at all.
It is active.
It is active, unyielding, almost aggressive resistance. It means holding the line.
What's fascinating here is how that completely shifts the entire burden of action. It removes the divine magic from the equation and replaces it with immense human responsibility.
It really does. And when you pair that with the rationalist definition of taqwa, the whole paradigm shifts.
Right, because taqwa is not about fear anymore.
No. In this systemic framework, Taqwa isn't about an emotional state of fear or trembling.
So what at?
It means the strict observance, protection, and implementation of constitutional divine laws.
Observance of laws.
Yes, it is a protective mechanism for society.
You know, it makes me think of structural engineering.
Oh, how so?
Well, imagine you are building a massive skyscraper in a hurricane zone.
Okay, I am picturing it.
Saber is the structural integrity of your steel foundation. The steel does not just patiently let the wind blow it over.
Right, it resists.
Exactly. It actively resists the kinetic energy of the storm. It holds its shape. And Taqwa, in this analogy, is the strict, uncompromising adherence to the laws of physics and the city building codes.
That makes perfect sense.
You do not cut corners. You do not use cheap concrete just because you fear the building inspector might pitch you. You follow the code because it is literally the only way the building survives the hurricane.
That is exactly the dynamic. The source argues that if a society builds its socio-economic system perfectly aligned with these natural permanent laws.
If it has real saber and Taqwa.
Exactly. Then it becomes mathematically immune to the subversion of its enemies.
Mathematically immune, that is a strong claim.
Well, the verse we are looking at says that if you maintain this structural integrity, the secret plots and machinations of your adversaries will bounce right off you.
Not because a magical invisible shield drops down from the sky.
No, but because a perfectly aligned, equitable system is fundamentally impenetrable from the outside.
There is no weak point for the enemy to exploit.
Precisely. Think about it. If everyone in the society is treated justly, if the economy is truly fair.
An outside enemy cannot come in and bribe your disenfranchised underclass to revolt.
Why not?
Because there is no disenfranchised underclass. They have nothing to use against you.
Exactly. And this mathematical certainty of cause and effect brings us to another drastically misunderstood term.
Yes, let's look at verse 116. The word is kafaru.
Oh, this is a very big one.
Traditionally, this is the root word for disbelievers or infidels.
Yes. It is almost always used to describe people who reject this specific theological faith.
Right, and the traditional texts say these people will be cast into a literal physical hellfire in the afterlife.
What the text calls al-nar, the fire.
Yeah, al-nar. And the tradition says all their earthly wealth cannot save them from this magical fire.
Which again traps us in that mystical, transactional mindset.
Believe the right dogma, avoid the magical fire.
But the rationalist analysis strips away all of that ethereal mysticism.
So what does kafaru actually mean in this socioeconomic context?
It isn't about whether you believe in a specific theology in your heart. It refers to people, or even whole societies, who actively reject the natural, objective laws of societal mechanics.
Wait, really? So they are the builders who ignore the engineering codes in our skyscraper analogy?
That is exactly what they are. They choose to build their society on a false foundation.
Like exploitation or massive wealth inequality.
Or tribalism. Yes, they are operating in direct defiance of the natural order.
And therefore, Al-Nar the fire is not some literal burning pit waiting for them after they die.
No, Al-Nar represents inevitable, real-world societal ruin.
Oh, wow.
It is the chaos, the revolution, the economic collapse, the literal burning of cities that ultimately consumes policies and states built on exploitation.
That was a massive aha moment for me when I was going through these notes.
It changes everything.
It really does. Because the text explicitly says that for these kafaru, their wealth and their offspring will yield a zero result against the fire.
Yes, a zero result.
Under the traditional lens, that just means, you cannot bribe the angels at the gates of hell with your gold.
Right.
But under this rationalist lens, the argument is that you simply cannot buy your way out of a structurally flawed ideology.
It is a brilliant diagnosis of failing empires.
It really is. You can amass all the material wealth in the world. You can have a massive population, what the text calls offspring or numerical advantage.
You can have the biggest military on earth.
Right. But if your foundational socioeconomic system is false, if it rejects universal justice, it will eventually burn down.
You can throw billions of dollars at a broken societal structure, but if the foundation is rotting, the money just becomes kindling for the eventual fire.
We see this throughout history constantly. Massive, wealthy empires that just spontaneously implode because their internal mechanics were fundamentally unjust.
Material supremacy is entirely useless if a society is out of sync with natural laws.
Wow.
A system of din requires constructive alignment with these laws of social physics.
Whereas a mazhab just ends up relying on wealth.
Yes. A mazhab often ends up relying on the futile accumulation of wealth and power to protect its illogical dogma.
And spending massive wealth to protect a false traditional dogma always results in total destruction.
Always. Which perfectly sets up the next major concept in our deep dive today.
Yes, let's move into segment 2. We have been talking around this idea of social physics, but the source material has a very specific term for it.
The Law of Requital.
Right, or mukafat iamal.
And the text asks a really brutal question of the listener here.
It really is brittle. It asks, when a society suffers, when a hurricane wipes out a coastline, or an economy completely crashes and millions of people lose their homes, is that God's will?
Or is it a failure of scientific planning?
This is perhaps the most radical departure from traditional religious thought in the entire framework.
It is. It centers around a concept found in verse 117. The term is zalamu anfusahum.
Zalamu anfusahum. The literal translation leans towards something like they wronged themselves or self-inflicted ruin.
Yes. And the verse uses a very vivid, chilling metaphor to explain this.
The freezing wind.
Right. It describes a freezing, biting wind that sweeps through and completely destroys the harvest of an unprincipled people.
Now, historically, human beings absolutely love to blame poverty, disaster, and disease on fate.
It is the ultimate psychological defense mechanism.
It really is. If the harvest freezes, the ancient farmer says, well, the gods are angry.
Even today, insurance companies literally call natural disasters acts of God.
I didn't even think about that, but yes, if an economy crashes, people say, it is just the natural cycle. It is out of our hands. It is the ultimate scapegoat.
But Parwez's analysis of this verse highlights an utter, uncompromising rejection of that fatalism.
Utter rejection.
In this framework, God does not arbitrarily oppress anyone.
The divine system never acts as a tyrant throwing lightning bolts at people who didn't pray hard enough.
No. The freezing wind in the verse is literally just a metaphor for natural and economic disasters. The wind does not have an agenda.
So the freezing wind isn't a targeted divine laser beam of punishment. It is literally just the wind. It is nature doing what nature does.
Precisely. The ruin does not come because God wanted them to starve.
Why does it come then?
The ruin comes because the people failed to proactively protect their harvest. They failed to understand the climate.
They failed to build silos.
We failed to innovate. And this introduces a mandatory, critical component of the system, tadabir.
Tadabir. Let's dig into that because I think this is where the system gets incredibly demanding of its people.
It does. Tadabir translates to proactive scientific planning.
Scientific planning?
Yes. Using human intellect, observation, and science to devise protective measures against natural and systemic disasters.
And here's the crucial part that the source emphasizes. In this ideological framework, utilizing tadabir is not just a smart administrative move.
No. It is a strict divine requirement.
Okay, I have to step in and push back here for a second.
Sure.
Because I can hear the skepticism from you listening right now. If a magnitude 9 earthquake hits a city or a massive tsunami wipes out a coastline, no amount of human engineering is going to completely stop that.
That is true.
So isn't it incredibly arrogant and frankly a bit victim-blaming to look at a destroyed city, people pulling rubble off their ruined homes, and say, well, zalamu anfusahum, you wronged yourselves because your scientific planning wasn't good enough.
I see what you mean.
Doesn't that lack basic human empathy?
That is a very valid, incredibly important pushback. And it is a tension the text inherently wrestles with.
How does the rationalist school address it?
They would argue that it isn't about a lack of empathy at all. It is about a radical demand for human accountability to prevent future suffering.
Prevent future suffering.
Okay. The Law of Requital, this social physics we keep mentioning, establishes that actions aligned with natural laws yield constructive results. The text calls these hasanat.
Constructive results.
Yes. And negligence, whether willful or ignorant, yields destruction.
So it is not saying you deserve to suffer. It is saying gravity does not care about your feelings.
Exactly. If you build a city on a major fault line and you do not invest in seismic retrofitting because you would rather spend that state money on luxury goods for the elite.
Right.
And then an earthquake levels the city. That is not God testing your patience.
You cannot stand in the ruins and say, God willed this.
The framework argues that saying God willed this in that scenario is actually a massive insult to the divine system.
Oh, wow.
The destruction is a direct mathematical indictment of your society's failure to master the laws of nature and economics. You wronged yourselves by failing to use tadabir.
To rely passively on God's will without utilizing human intellect is actually a violation of the system itself.
It is the ultimate violation.
Yeah.
A society that prays for safety but refuses to study meteorology, engineering, and economics is a society that fundamentally rejects the din.
If you apply this to our modern societal crises, it is a staggering perspective.
It really is.
Think about preventable environmental disasters or systemic financial collapses. This framework demands absolute human accountability.
You cannot blame fate. You cannot blame the universe.
You have to do the math. You have to build the infrastructure.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally redefines what it means to be a believer in this system.
How so?
A believer isn't someone who lights a candle and prays for the hurricane to miss their house.
Right.
A believer is the engineer who calculates the wind resistance, studies the fluid dynamics, and builds a stronger levee to protect the entire community.
Okay, so let's say we have this society of engineers. We are proactively planning for the freezing wind.
Good.
We are building the physical infrastructure to protect the harvest. But infrastructure costs money.
Yes, it does.
People need to eat while they're pouring the concrete for the levees, right?
Mm.
How does the system actually function on a day-to-day basis? How does it handle economics?
That leads us right into segment 3 and what the Thors calls Nizam-e-Rubugat.
The system of providence.
Exactly. This is the economic engine of the state.
Okay, we have established that this state is highly logical, scientifically planned, and based on a very specific, uncompromising ideology. But here's the massive question. What happens to the people living inside these borders who completely disagree with the ideology?
Ah, the non-believers.
Right. Are they just out of luck? If I am living in this state and I say, look, I do not believe in your operating system, I do not want to be part of your din, do I get cut off from the harvest?
This is a critical juncture in the source material.
Yeah.
And it is where this system sharply diverges from many historical authoritarian regimes.
Okay.
It introduces the concepts of adl and quist, absolute, universal justice.
Universal justice.
The rule is this. While the ideological borders of the state are incredibly strict, the civic and human rights provided by the state are unconditionally universal.
What does that actually look like in practice? Ground that for me if you can.
Sure. Under this framework, the state takes unconditional responsibility for protecting the life, wealth, and honor of all non-Muslims living within its borders.
Unconditional.
Yes, they are legally categorized and protected as al-Dima. And the state isn't just told to, merely tolerate them. It is commanded to deal with them with absolute justice and husn suluk.
Husn suluk, which translates to what?
Excellent, beautiful, compassionate conduct.
There was a note in the source material that really stopped me in my tracks regarding this.
Which one?
It emphasizes a strict Quranic mandate that basically says, you must never let the enmity of a people motivate you to act unjustly.
Yes, let not the hatred of others to you make you swerve to wrong and depart from justice.
That is incredibly difficult to do on a human level. I mean, think about it.
It requires immense discipline.
It means even if a specific group of people living in your society holds deep, visceral, vocal hostility toward your state's ideology, the state's justice cannot waver.
Not an inch.
You cannot weaponize the legal system against them. You cannot economically starve them out.
Because justice adl is what Parwez calls a permanent value.
A permanent value.
Yes. It is a law of social physics, just like gravity.
Yeah.
It cannot be compromised or suspended due to religious differences, personal affinities, or political friction.
Wow.
The central authority of the state, which the text calls the Markazi Malat, acts as the provider of Rububiyat providence.
So it acts as the stand-in for divine nourishment on earth.
Therefore, it must ensure economic justice and resource distribution so that absolutely no human being, regardless of their theology, goes to bed hungry.
So if we look at it through a modern economic lens, it is akin to an unconditional, universal basic rights and welfare floor.
Yes, that is a very good modern equivalent.
And the key word is unconditional. You cannot revoke someone's access to healthcare or food or shelter or legal protection just because they disagree with your political party or your religious ideology.
Right. Even if they actively hate your system, as long as they are resident, they get fed, they get protected, their human dignity is fully maintained.
Exactly. The system strictly and surgically separates ideological integration from civic welfare.
Rejection of the state's ideology does not equate to the state hating the individual person.
And this rigid ethical mandate does not just apply internally Right. It extends forcefully into foreign policy as well.
Yes, the diplomatic integrity aspect.
Because if a state is operating on social physics, it cannot be hypocritical on the global stage.
The source is highly specific here regarding treaties. Agreements made with foreign, non-Muslim, or even actively hostile entities must be honored meticulously.
No backdoor deals.
No deceit, no espionage-based trickery, and broken promises are strictly prohibited because they violate adl, they violate justice.
But what if the state knows the other side is about to break the treaty? What if they have intelligence that the enemy is massing troops on the border?
Even then, the state cannot use trickery or launch a secret preemptive strike.
Really? They just have to wait.
Well, the rule is that if the state legitimately fears a breach of agreement, they must openly and publicly declare the treaty void on equal terms.
Openly declare it.
They must essentially say, we know what you are doing, the treaty is now dissolved, and we are now in a state of mutual defense.
Accountability before the international community and adherence to the permanent values is paramount.
You cannot use injustice to protect justice.
Yeah.
It is mathematically impossible in this framework.
Okay, here is where it gets really interesting. And frankly, where I need to play the skeptic again.
Go for it.
We have a state that gives unconditional universal welfare to everyone, including people who hate the ideology.
Yes.
It has to be completely 100% transparent in its foreign policy.
Yeah.
It cannot use secret preemptive strikes. It treats domestic ideological opponents with excellent conduct.
I hear the but coming.
But how on earth does a state like that actually survive? Aren't you just funding your own assassins at that point?
It does sound vulnerable, doesn't it?
If you give total freedom and resources to people who fundamentally want to destroy your operating system, aren't you just inviting Trojan horses into your city?
That exact tension is what brings us to segment 4 and the concept of Bitanah, which is detailed in verse 118.
Bitanah.
Yes. This is where the state balances universal civic rights with rigorous, uncompromising ideological security.
I remember looking up the traditional translation for verse 118. It usually reads something like, do not take non-believers as close friends.
Right.
Which, I will be honest, always sounded a bit petty to me, like high school cafeteria rules, do not sit with the uncool kids.
It does sound incredibly cliquey and tribal in the traditional translation.
Yeah.
And it completely contradicts the earlier command to treat non-believers with excellent conduct. How can you treat someone with beautiful conduct but refuse to be their friend?
Exactly. It makes no sense.
But the systemic definition resolves this paradox entirely.
How so?
Well, the word bitanah comes from the Arabic root meaning belly, or the inside lining of a garment.
Okay, the inside lining.
In the context of an administrative state, Parwez argues that bitanah does not mean a buddy you grab coffee with.
So what does it mean?
It specifically refers to the inner administrative circles, sensitive policy-making boards, and state secrets, what the text calls Rumuzi Mumlikat.
Ah, so it is not about social friendship at all. It is about top secret security clearance.
Precisely. It is the law of self-preservation.
Okay, that makes way more sense.
The text dictates that you cannot, under any circumstances, integrate non-aligned personnel into sensitive policymaking, military defense, or high-level secretarial positions.
Well, why is that? If they are highly qualified, why not use them?
Because individuals who do not fundamentally ideologically believe in the state's founding mission will inherently, even if subconsciously, seek its subversion.
I see.
Their ultimate life goals, their values, do not align with the survival of the state's unique system.
Right. If the state is entirely dedicated to the eradication of interest-based capitalism, you cannot put a diehard capitalist in charge of your central bank, no matter how good they are at math.
That is a perfect example. You just cannot do it.
Yeah. There is an incredible historical anecdote in the sources that perfectly, almost cinematically, illustrates this exact boundary.
Yes, I know exactly which one you mean. It involves Hazrat Umar, the second caliph of the Islamic State.
Yes, the story of the Christian accountant. It is a masterclass in administrative bitanah.
Let's set the scene for the listener.
Okay, so the Islamic State is expanding rapidly, the economy is ballooning, logistics are getting incredibly complex, and they desperately need highly specialized experts to run the secretariat and manage the state accounting.
They need top-tier talent.
Exactly. And the administration finds a Christian man who is an absolute prodigy. He is a highly skilled accountant, the absolute top of his field in the region.
The state really needs his skills.
But Hazrat Umar, the head of the state, denies him the position. He flat out refuses to give him access to the state's financial records.
Because in that era, those financial records didn't just show money. They showed troop movements, resource allocation, and vulnerabilities.
They constituted core state secrets.
Entrusting the belly of the state to someone who was completely outside the ideological core was a massive administrative security risk.
But the kicker, the part that really blew my mind and proves the universal justice aspect, is what happened next.
Yes, what Umar did next is crucial.
Umar didn't throw this man in jail for being a potential spy. He didn't execute him. He actually went to the man and suggested that he accept the state's ideology, that he convert to Islam, so that he could legally take the job and help the state.
And the man said no.
He said no, he stood his ground.
And how did the most powerful man in the state react to being rejected?
Umar respected the decision. He immediately cited the fundamental Quranic rule that there is no compulsion in religion.
No compulsion.
He told the man, basically, I respect your choice. And he allowed this Christian man to live his entire life freely, securely, and with full civic rights and welfare within the state.
The man kept his life, his honor, and his freedom.
He just didn't get the security clearance.
It perfectly, elegantly encapsulates the separation of ideological integration from civic welfare. Ideological exclusion from state secrets is a matter of pure administrative security. It is not a denial of civic dignity.
So if I can build an analogy here for you listening, imagine you are the founder of a massive mission-driven corporation.
Okay.
Let's say your company is fundamentally, passionately dedicated to open source software. You believe all code should be free.
A noble mission.
And your biggest global rival is a massive, ruthless, proprietary software monopoly that wants to privatize absolutely everything.
Right.
Now, the CEO of that rival monopoly comes to you. You wouldn't put that rival CEO on your board of directors, right?
Definitely not.
You wouldn't hand them your trade secrets, your server passwords, or your future roadmap. Because fundamentally, their ideology is opposed to yours. Their ultimate success requires your company to fail.
Exactly. You protect your Bitanah.
But, and here's where the add all the justice comes in, you wouldn't hire a hitman to take them out either.
No, you wouldn't.
You wouldn't slash their tires in the parking lot. You would still treat them fairly and ethically in the open marketplace. If they walked into your company's public cafeteria, you would sell them a sandwich.
You wouldn't violate their human rights. You protect your core, but you maintain your ethics.
Exactly.
That is a very apt modern translation of the concept. The rationalist framework argues that integrating oppositional ideologies into a system's core administrative machinery guarantees its internal sabotage.
It makes sense.
It leads to what the text calls fasadi kabir, massive, systemic corruption, friction, and ultimate destruction. You cannot mix oil and water and expect a unified engine to run.
Which brings up a really fascinating philosophical dilemma, leading us into segment 5.
The definition of a nation.
Right. If this society is so strictly defined by its ideology, if ideology dictates who can run the government, but everyone else just lives there safely, what exactly makes a group of people a nation in this system?
This is where Parwez's rational analysis directly collides with modern Western political theory. It challenges the very definition of nationhood.
How so?
Well, the Arabic terms used in the text are milat, or qawm. Now, the modern view, which emerged mostly after the Peace of Westphalia in Europe, is based on a concept called wataniyat.
Wataniyat. That means territorial nationalism.
Yes. Wataniyat dictates that a nation is a group of people who share a geographic border, a language, a history, or a biological race.
You are American because you were born on the sturt.
Right. You are French because you speak this language and share this history.
But the framework we are discussing completely rejects wataniyat.
Entirely. In the Quranic socio-economic model, a true nation, a milat, is forged exclusively through a shared ideology.
Exclusively?
Yes. Biological ties, ethnic backgrounds, linguistic similarities, the color of your skin, the borders you were born within, they are entirely secondary. They are irrelevant to true nationhood.
That is radical. It means that the concept of a citizen is fundamentally different.
The source material drives this point home by using the historical examples of the prophets Abraham and Noah.
Oh, I remember reading that part.
It points out that even the most sacred biological bond, the bond between a father and a son, is superseded by ideological alignment.
So if a father and son hold contradictory foundational beliefs regarding the system of life, they do not belong to the same millat.
Exactly. They are practically of two different nations, even if they live in the exact same house.
Wow. So to translate that to the macro level, Muslims and non-Muslims living in the exact same geographic territory, working in the same economy, cannot form a single unified Qawm or nation because their foundational beliefs about how the universe operates are opposed.
Correct. The state recognizes this reality through what Parwez calls the Law of Unity.
The Law of Unity.
A system built on fragmented, contradictory ideologies cannot sustainably govern itself.
Right.
If you attempt to force an artificial nationhood out of fundamentally opposing groups, if you say, we are all one nation because we live on this side of the river, while half the population believes in hyper-capitalism and the other half believes in pure communism, it doesn't create harmony.
It creates perpetual grinding friction.
It creates that facade-e-kabir we mentioned earlier.
Okay, I have to jump in here again because human nature is incredibly complicated.
Very true.
Let's say this state actually achieves its goal. It has its unified ideological core running the markaz. It is providing universal welfare.
Good.
It is protecting human rights. It is honoring all its treaties.
Right.
It is operating on pure, flawless scientific planning, tadabir.
Yes.
It is, by all definitions, the most objectively just society on Earth.
Okay.
Why would anyone hate it? Why wouldn't everyone, even the non-believers, just look at it and say, wow, this is working great. Let's just live and let live?
That is a very logical question, but it completely ignores the reality of human power dynamics.
How so?
And the text anticipates this perfectly in verse 119. It introduces the psychological concept of al-Ghais.
Al-Ghais, subsurface ideological hostility.
Exactly. Think about it sociologically. An equitable, perfectly just socio-economic system fundamentally threatens exploitative vested interests.
Ah, I see.
There are factions in the world whose entire power, immense wealth, and social influence rely on division.
They rely on class exploitation, on monopolies.
On religious gatekeeping, on keeping people poor so they will work for cheap.
Right. If you are a billionaire who makes your money by exploiting debt, a society that outlaws exploitative interest and guarantees housing for everyone is your absolute worst nightmare.
Even if it is just, it destroys your power.
Precisely. These vested interests will inherently despise a system that democratizes providence and enforces absolute justice.
But because the state is strong, and because the state is acting ethically, these opponents cannot openly attack it without looking like the villains.
So the hostility goes underground.
Exactly. The verse vividly describes this. It says these factions may outwardly claim peaceful coexistence.
They smile at you in the diplomatic meetings.
They will say, we believe in peace, or we are with you in the global community. But privately, in their own chambers, they are literally biting their fingertips in intense rage at the state's very existence.
Biting their fingertips in rage. That is quite an image.
This consuming hidden fury is al-Ghais. They hate the state not because the state has wronged them, but because the state's justice exposes their own injustice.
That is a terrifying psychological reality to govern against. How is the state supposed to react to this hidden rage?
That is the big question.
If you know via your intelligence agencies that these foreign or domestic groups secretly despise you and want you destroyed, do you launch a witch hunt? Do you start arresting people for thought crimes?
No. And that is where the absolute genius of the systemic vigilance required by this framework comes into play. The state is commanded to remain entirely undisturbed by this private hostility.
Undisturbed, like do nothing.
Yes. It must maintain its strict constitutional boundaries and its emotional discipline without compromising its ethics.
Which brings us full circle back to the very first words we discussed today. Saber and taqwa.
Constitutional resilience.
When you know your enemies are secretly raging against you, you don't react with panic.
You don't become emotionally erratic.
You don't resort to counter-conspiracies or secret police or assassinations.
Because doing so would violate adl. It would violate justice.
It would break the laws of social physics. You would become the very thing you are trying to defend against.
Exactly. You would destroy your own foundation.
Instead, the framework dictates that you rely entirely on the impenetrable shield of the divine constitution.
You ensure your tadabir, your planning is flawless. You ensure your Bitanah, your security clearance, is strictly maintained.
And you let the enemy consume themselves in their own rage.
Because social physics dictates that a perfectly aligned system cannot be destroyed from the outside.
Wow. So what does this all mean for us? Let's take a step back and synthesize this massive paradigm shift for you, the listener.
It is a lot to take in.
We started this hour by asking a simple question. Why do people fall into the ritual trap? Why do we treat ancient verses as magic spells, hoping to buy divine favor while the world burns around us?
And what G.A. Parwez's rationalist analysis of Surah Al-Imran has shown us is that a society's survival isn't based on magic.
It isn't based on how fervently you pray, and it certainly isn't based on the arbitrary luck of geography or race.
Survival and prosperity rely on what this framework calls the permanent values.
It requires absolute, uncompromising, universal justice for every single human being, regardless of their ideology or their personal hostility toward you.
It requires impenetrable administrative security Bitanah, keeping the core mission safe from those who would inherently seek to subvert it.
Then, crucially, it requires proactive, relentless scientific planning tadabir to protect society from the freezing winds of natural and economic disaster.
That is the civilizational blueprint.
I want you to look at our own modern institutions today through this lens. Are we, as a global society, falling into the ritual trap?
Are we slapping shiny ideological or political labels on fundamentally broken exploitative systems and just hoping that sheer wealth will magically save us from collapse?
Or a massive military or a huge population? Or are we actually doing the hard, uncompromising work of social physics?
When the storm is brewing on the horizon, are we studying the meteorology and building the levee?
Or are we just sitting in the dirt reciting slogans and praying the water doesn't rise?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the lecture we've analyzed today presents a mathematically robust, fiercely pragmatic model for a civilization.
It really does. It shows how a state can construct an economic engine that leaves no one behind, while simultaneously protecting its core from the natural elements and the external plots of its enemies.
But analyzing this robust external defense mechanism raises a highly unsettling, critically important question.
Oh, I know exactly where you're going with this. The Achilles heel.
We've established how the system mathematically repels external threats.
We know how it handles the freezing wind.
We know how it handles the raging foreign enemy. But what happens when the rot starts from the inside?
Yes. What happens when the people inside the ideological core, the supposed believers, the ones who have full Bitanah security clearance, the ones running the markaz, start using the system for their own personal exploitation?
How does the Law of Requital deal with the ultimate fatal threat of internal hypocrisy?
Because you can build the strongest steel walls in the world, perfectly aligned with the laws of physics. But if the termites are born inside the foundation itself, the house still falls.
That is the ultimate test of the system's true resilience. It is the most dangerous variable in social physics, and it is the exact theoretical dilemma we will have to explore in our next deep dive.
I honestly cannot wait to unpack that. It has been an absolute masterclass today. Thank you so much for joining us on this intellectual journey. Remember, this deep dive was custom tailored just for you to help you cut through the historical noise and get straight to the insights that challenge how we view the world. Until next time, keep questioning the systems around you, demand real accountability, and whatever you do, do not get caught in the ritual trap.